everyone and welcome back to my channel. I hope you are doing really well. Thank you so much for clicking on today's video. Today's video is going to be a little bit of a different one for me. I thought it would be a really nice idea to sit down and chat with you all about my trip to Australia. So I actually solo traveled to Australia last year. I went at the end of November, December. I just really thought it would be a nice idea to create this video in case there's anyone out there who is looking to solo travel by themselves, to give tips on budgets, locations, excursions, people to book with, flights, all of that good stuff. And so I thought I would sit down and kind of film a little bit of an insider to my trip. So that is what today's video is going to be about. If that does sound like a bit of you, then be sure to stick around and subscribe down below. I've just changed the angle slightly, so hopefully it doesn't look too different. But I've basically written everything down on my phone, and I'm just going to kind of walk through all of the areas that I think are probably the most important, or the ones that people would want to know about the most. So I've included my itinerary, hostels, hotels, who I book with, who I've flown with, etc. So I'm going to start with who I booked my trip through. So as I said, I went by myself, so I wanted to be able to kind of book a trip through a company that kind of organizes your travel and all of your excursions and your itinerary for you. So I actually booked with My Adventure Project. You might have seen bits and bobs about them online, and I had done quite a bit of research into different companies, and this one came out as quite affordable and also a really good itinerary for the length of time that I wanted to do. So I opted for their 15-day East Coast tour. I was only in Australia for 3 weeks, so this was kind of ideal for me. I think the price was around £1,500 for the 2 weeks, and within that you get all of your travel included, all of your excursions, and then any food and drink that's included on those excursions is also included in that price as well. So really handy, and for me, I just like the idea of having all of my Greyhound buses all booked and ready for me to go, so that when I needed to get on them, all I needed to do was show up. I didn't have to worry about booking any tickets. In terms of the company, I think they were really good, but I think there's a few things that they could have done that would have made it a little bit easier for me. Firstly, they kind of send your itinerary as like a calendar with your kind of like pictures in each date as to like when you're flying and when you're on an excursion. For me, and I don't know if this is just because I'm super organized, but I like to have a list of where I need to be at what time, and so I think that probably would have benefited me better than just having sort of this calendar that was quite minimal in terms of information. And I also would have really loved for them just to triple check that I'm okay with mixed hostels. You can obviously let them know that you just want to do female only, but I think whilst you're in the midst of booking everything, it just would have been super nice for them just to give you an extra check to make sure you're happy to go into a mixed hostel rather than just kind of going ahead and booking it. But aside from that, I can't really fault them. As I said, everything was booked every time I turned up to a hostel or got my Greyhound bus. All of my details were there, nothing went amiss. I was booked and ready on everything, and it was just a really nice kind of weight off my shoulder to know that I didn't have to do anything really when I was out there on that tour. So yeah, I would probably give them like a 6-7 out of 10, just based on those little bits of things that I think for me just would have made it a bit more comfortable. Next then, I'm going to go on to who I booked my flights with. So I actually flew out to Sydney. I didn't get to Sydney in the end because our flight was diverted to Brisbane due to really bad weather. So I ended up staying in Brisbane an extra couple of nights, which was absolutely fine. And I flew to Brisbane with Qatar. I would not recommend Qatar Airways at all. Due to our flight being diverted, it obviously meant then that I had to pay for a brand new hotel for 2 nights. I had to pay for taxis to the airport, etc. And they have not given me any of that money back, and we're now on about 3 months since I requested that refund. So just based on that alone, I think is enough for me not to use an airline again. I then flew back from Perth because I flew with Qantas. So I did the non-stop flight from Perth to London Heathrow. I think it's about 17.5 hours. So it was a long flight. However, I slept for most of it because it was a night flight, and then I arrived at Heathrow at about 5:30 in the morning. So that was kind of ideal for me. I would highly recommend Qantas. The flight was really comfortable. They also moved me. So I was in a row with a couple next to me. I was in the aisle seat and they basically asked if I was alone, which I was, and then they moved me to a row with another lady with a middle seat that was free, so I had a lot more room. And I think little touches like that really do make a difference. So I highly recommend Qantas. Qatar Airways I will never fly with again. And then I'm going to quickly speak about budget then before I go into my itinerary. So I took about £1,300 out with me. So in Australian dollars, it's basically double, so around $2,600. I will say that Australia is not the cheapest of places to go. Everything over there is basically double what it costs here. So if you're buying a Starbucks for £4, it's going to be $8 over in Australia. However, I found that that budget really was perfect in terms of food, anything extra that I wanted to pay for. I bought a couple of clothing bits. I ended up staying in some nicer hotels towards the end of my trip that I then paid for with that budget. And obviously a lot of my accommodation and travel and things like that was already paid for through the tour. So for me, I would say if you're going for the same time as me, around 3 to 4 weeks, I would say that kind of like perfect kind of budget would be around £1,500. That's just for me, and I didn't feel like I had to sort of stay back with what I was buying. I ate lovely food. I bought some nice bits while I was out there, including like souvenirs and things like that. So yeah, in terms of budget, that's how much I took, and I'd say between $1,300 and $1,500 is ideal for like the 3 to 4 week mark if you've already booked and prepaid for a tour already. Okay, so the next then I'm going to go into like the itinerary and then sort of like the hostels that I stayed in. So as I said, I ended up being in Brisbane for an extra 2 days, which meant that I had a couple of days in the city that I hadn't planned for. So I ended up going to Australia Zoo for one of the days, and then I also went to, I think it's called the Pine Koala Sanctuary, and I absolutely loved them both. Australia Zoo for me was just so nostalgic. I don't know about any of you, but I grew up watching The Crocodile Hunter, so to be there and to experience Australia Zoo was just really fun. I also got to watch Robert Irwin do the crocodile show, which honestly was just so much fun. I was like fangirling so hard because I love watching him on TikTok and things like that, and I know that he doesn't do it all the time, so I feel like I really lucked out with seeing him there. But it was just the most insane experience. I'll pop in some videos. I got to feed some kangaroos. I got to see koalas. I booked my ticket online for the zoo, and then I booked a transfer with a company who I cannot remember the name of. I think they were called Croc Tours, and they basically picked people up at different hotels around Brisbane and then drove from there straight to the zoo. You then go into the zoo, have your day, and then they're parked outside the entrance at 3:30 for you to jump back in the van, and they drive you back to Brisbane City. For me, that was amazing. It cost $100 and it just made the whole day so seamless. So I highly, highly recommend booking with them if you can. They also do a package where you can book the ticket and the travel together. But yeah, they were really, really easy to book with, and I highly recommend. Just to say, everything that I do mention will be linked down below in case anyone wants to book any links or look into anything. Everything will be in my description. So that is what I ended up doing in Brisbane. As I said, I then went to the Pine Koala Sanctuary. It was amazing. I got to kind of meet one of the koalas and kind of stroke him and have pictures and things with him. You aren't allowed to hold the koalas there. They've kind of stopped doing that. You basically go in, have about 5 minutes with them so they don't get too overwhelmed, and then you move on, and that's that. So I really recommend that as well. They look after so many koalas there. They're all rescues that have maybe been injured, or they're just super old. So yeah, it was a really, really lovely experience. I got an Uber from Brisbane City out there, and then I got a bus back. The bus stop is right outside the entrance and takes you right back to the city. So when I was in Brisbane then, I was staying in Bunk, which is a hostel at the kind of top end of the city. I have never really stayed in a hostel before, so this was like a brand new experience for me. In terms of like the hostel itself, I was only there for one night before I then went to my next kind of destination. I arrived in the dorm and my bed sheets were still the other person's bed sheets on that bed, and like nothing had been changed. And when I asked for fresh bed sheets, it was almost like I had like requested the most ridiculous thing in the world, which I didn't really appreciate. So I guess based on that, I wouldn't rank them that highly, because it was kind of rude. But the girls in my dorm were really lovely, and as I said, I got fresh bedding, and that was kind of it really. In terms of location, it's quite out of the city, so in order to do anything you do have to walk about half an hour back into Brisbane city. But as I said, I was only really there for a night, and then the next day then I was on to my next destination, which was Rainbow Beach. So I got my Greyhound bus from the bus stop all the way up to Rainbow Beach, and I stayed in Freedom Hostel, which is right opposite the bus stop. Rainbow Beach is a very strange place, I guess, because people really only go there to then go on their Fraser Island tour very soon after. So there's a couple of cafes and a beautiful beach, but that's kind of it really. And I think Freedom Hostel is the only hostel that is there. So there isn't really much else to do there, if I'm being completely honest. The hostel itself was really nice. Again, the staff were really friendly, the rooms were really clean, which I really liked, and they were also quite spacious. I found with a few of my hostels that they'd really tried to cram in as many beds as possible, which I just didn't really appreciate, because obviously everyone in there has got big suitcases, backpacks, and it can just be quite intense. But I really enjoyed that kind of area and hostel. Everyone was really nice. The Fraser Island tour was probably one of the best things I did on my entire trip. So I did our tour with a company called Dingos, and they were amazing. I think there's two main companies that do these tours, and that was the one that I had been booked on through my adventure project. They had booked me onto this one, and it was just so much fun. Just a heads up, you have absolutely no signal on Fraser Island at all, so I kind of warned my partner and my parents that I wasn't going to be able to be contacted for about 3 days until I was off the island. But I absolutely loved it. I'll pop some pictures up on the screen just to give a bit of an idea of what I got to do and what I saw, but it was just the most insane experience of my life, and I just don't think that anything I'll do will come close to that, because I just don't know when I'm going to be driving around the beach in a 4x4 again in my life, if I'm completely honest. Especially there, like, it was just so fun. So if you are in kind of like on the East Coast, I cannot recommend doing that enough. We had the nicest group. Our tour leader was just incredible. He was so knowledgeable, and I just learned so much about the island and what it meant and its kind of meaning. It was amazing. So yeah, I really, really recommend that. From Rainbow Beach then, I then got an overnight coach all the way to Airlie Beach. Now, I was quite nervous about an overnight coach because I'm not great when I don't have much sleep, but I was actually fine. It was around 15 hours. It stops very regularly for you, and it actually was not as bad as I thought. I was going then from Airlie Beach to do my Whitsundays tour, which I was so excited about. I feel like going to Australia and going to Whitsundays is almost like a given, like it's just something that you have to do. So I actually went on a 2-day boat tour around the Whitsundays. That was incredible. I loved doing it by boat. I thought that you were able to see so much than if you just kind of went out in the day. However, I was on the Atlantic Clipper, and it is a big party boat, and that is not really my vibe. Thankfully, I found a couple of girls on that boat who also didn't really know that, like, didn't enjoy that vibe either, and we kind of like stuck together. So I will say that if you aren't a big party person, then this boat probably isn't for you. There are other boats that do the same kind of tour that are a lot more mellow and chill, and in hindsight, I wish that I had been booked onto that. So that's just a flag from me. Atlantic Clipper is like boozy AF, and yeah, there's a lot of activity going on between people, and if that's not really your vibe, which it's not for me either, then definitely avoid that one. I will say the food on that boat was incredible. The chef on there was so good. The food was amazing, and yeah, apart from the booziness and the activities going on, seeing it by boat and being on a boat for 2 days, I really, really love. But yeah, the Atlantic Clipper is one to avoid if you are not a boozy party person. So we then came back to Airlie Beach after being on the boat for 2 days, and I then stayed in Magnum's for 1 night. I loved this hostel so much. It's like a proper jungle vibe, and you all get private rooms, which after being on a boat for 2 days and not really being able to shower and sharing with people in very teeny tiny rooms was so welcome. I absolutely loved it. It was very clean. The rooms were just really nice. It's been recently renovated, so in terms of a hostel, that was probably one of the best ones that I stayed in, and I can't recommend it enough. It's right in the main square. You're right by the beach, you're right by all the shops and restaurants. Like, in terms of location, it's absolutely perfect. It's also about 20 minutes away from the Greyhound bus stop, which again is really, really helpful. So from there then, I then went to Magnetic Island. So I hopped back on the coach up to Magnetic Island, and then I got a ferry from the bus stop over to Magnetic Island then. I didn't mind Magnetic Island, but I will say I was quite bored. I was only there for 1 night, and I stayed at Nomads. I think there's only 2 hostels on the island. This one has a bar and a really lovely restaurant, but the rooms were tiny. I was in a mixed dorm with 6 people, and there wasn't really room in there to swing a cat with everyone's bags. It was a bit dirty. Like, it was just, I just did not rate the hostel at all. The staff were really nice, but in terms of space, it was just very, very cramped, and I just didn't really enjoy it that much. And as I said, I was a bit bored. There wasn't loads to do. I went on like a famous walk that you can go on where you can see wild koalas, which I was lucky enough to do, and I'll pop some pictures in. But in terms of like an area, I don't know, there just wasn't a lot to do there. You can obviously rent like the Barbie Jeeps and drive around the island, but being that I was there by myself, I didn't really want to do that on my own. So yeah. It's kind of one of those places where I feel like you can go, but I don't feel like you would be missing out on much if you didn't go there. So that's all I'll say about that one. And then from Magnetic Island then, I got back on the ferry, back to the main island, and then hopped on a Greyhound up to Cairns. And this is where I did my Great Barrier Reef tour. I stayed in a hostel called Global Backpackers, and I actually booked myself a private room. I had been booked in by my adventure project to Gilligan's. However, I was in an 8-bed mixed dorm, and I'd heard that it was a really, really like boozy party hostel, and I just didn't want that. So I ended up booking my own room at Global Backpackers. I had a private room with a bathroom, and it was like staying in a hotel. It was so beautiful and clean. Location was amazing. It was right by the beach. It was right by the main harbour. It was right by all the shops and restaurants, and that was by far the best hostel that I stayed in. I cannot recommend it enough. The staff there were amazing. I just loved everything about it. Here then, as I said, I did my Great Barrier Reef tour. This was booked in for me by a company called Passions of Paradise. So my adventure project had booked it with that specific company. When you get to the harbour, there are hundreds of companies that obviously offer these Great Barrier Reef tours, but each company goes to specific areas each time. So none of the boats will go to the same area. So it will basically be one boat per area in the Great Barrier Reef. I loved this company. They were so much fun. The boat was amazing. The food, you get lunch on board, it was amazing. They were really knowledgeable. They give you the option to scuba dive if you want to, and it was just so much fun. That again was probably one of the most insane experiences of my life. I'll pop some videos up that I did with my GoPro, which is just insane. I feel like, again, when you're in Australia, swimming in the Great Barrier Reef is just such a big bucket list thing to tick off. And I'm so glad that I went with this company, or was booked in with this company, because they were just so good. So if you are wondering who to book through in terms of your tour, I can't recommend them enough. It was so, so good. And then that was kind of the end of my booked tour. So I then went from Cairns and flew over to Perth. I just wanted to really make the most of being in Australia, and I really wanted to go to Perth. I'd heard a lot of good things about it. And while I was in Perth, I stayed at the Pan Pacific Hotel. It's like my last couple of days in Australia, I wanted to book myself a really bougie hotel. And I did book this one. It was incredible. I booked it on booking.com. It was really affordable. I think I paid about £350 for 3 nights with breakfast included, which I didn't realise until I got there, so that was a really lovely surprise. But yeah, I can't fault it. Like, the staff were amazing. They were helping with like the bus stops I need to get to go to certain places, and they were just amazing. It was just a really, really lovely hotel to spend the last couple of my days in Australia there. It was just lovely. So while I was in Perth, I first went to Fremantle. So I'll pop some pictures up. It's a really interesting vibe. It basically looks like the Wild West. That's the only way I can describe it. I basically went there because I wanted to go to the markets, which were apparently amazing. However, they're only open Friday to Saturday, and I went on a Wednesday. So I got the bus from Perth city centre down to Fremantle. And yeah, obviously I wasn't able to do what I needed, but I had a lovely walk around. I went to Yochi, which is the famous frozen yogurt shop, which again, if you're in Australia, please go. It's amazing. Yeah, it was a really, really lovely town. Went there for a good couple of hours, came back, walked around Perth. It's just the perfect mix of city and beach. I loved Perth so much. It was probably my favourite place that I got to go to. I really, really loved it. So on the second, my last full day then, I went to Rottnest Island. So I booked that tour. I can't remember the name of the tour that I booked, but it will be linked down below. And again, this was really, really fun. The boat takes about an hour from Perth over to Rottnest Island. And then when you're there, you can hire bikes. You can book a tour and the bike together, but it tends to be a little bit more expensive. So I actually rented my bike while I was on the island, and it was insane. Again, I'll put some pictures up. I got to see lots of quokkas. It was amazing, and I definitely recommend it to like something to do while you're in Perth, because it was just amazing. It's such a beautiful island, and obviously it's the only place in the world where you can see quokkas unless you go to the zoo. So yeah, it was amazing. It was so much fun, and being able to do it by bike was just really amazing. You can get a bus ticket, and the bus kind of goes around the island and drops you off at different points. But for me, I just like to have the flexibility of having a bike and going as and when I please, when I want to. So yeah, really, really loved that. I then came back, and then the next day then was time for me to fly home. So that is kind of my trip in a nutshell. I hope that I've kind of gone in depth about as much as possible. If there are any questions that you have, please pop them down below and I can answer anything that you need. I know that I was looking for videos like this when I was booking my trip, so I really hope that this has come across as helpful. And as I said, if you do have any questions about anything that I did, anywhere I stayed, anything that I wouldn't do, anything that I would do again, please let me know down below in the comments and I will get back to you ASAP. I'm so glad that I did it. I'm 29 and I just felt like it was now or never. I was really worried that I wasn't gonna like make any friends or meet people my age, but I did. I met some amazing people. And it was just so much fun. Australia as a country is just beautiful, and yeah, it was just the best 3 weeks of my life. So I really hope that you enjoyed this video. I hope it was helpful. As I said, any comments, leave them down below, and I will chat to you all very soon in a brand new video. Bye!